Good evening, folks, and thanks for coming in. You're all very welcome. I hope you're all safe and well and enjoying the heat. Well, we're having a wee bit of heat wave in Scotland again, so this is day one of the heat wave. So long, it's meant to be lasting all week, but we shall wait and see. But tonight we are joined by the lovely Penny G. Morgan. The Penny stands the G. Penny stands for, I'm off to a good start, isn't it? G. Griffith.
Penny Griffiths Morgan, yes.
Who is the founder of the Haunted History channel. Also, she's an author. She's wrote books like Paranormal, Playtime, My Haunted History, and The Haunted Experiment. And she was also the historian on Help My House is Haunted.
Yep.
And she has been on A History of the Paranormal as well. So she's got a few strings there to go. You know, we've been waiting quite a few weeks now to get her on. I'll be quite looking forward to chatting to her because she's a bit history buff, as you can probably tell, same as ourselves, you know. So, Penny, it's lovely to finally meet you.
And you, from the south to the north.
From the north to the south and back again. I just hope you can understand me.
I've been all right so far. I missed the odd word, but I'm getting the gist of it.
So I'm going to ask you because, you know, I do it with Rosie Cardy for the Ghoul Gang, what have you, if you can do an accent.
I can't do Scottish.
I
tried to do Scottish the other day, but our mutual friend Gemma from Lost Souls Paranormal said, please don't ever do that again. I can do the odd word in Geordie.
I'll go on then, lass.
Conjunctivitis.
Conjunctivitis
And Black and Decker.
Black and Decker. I've got conjunctivitis. We're using the Black and Decker.
There you go. That's about the accents I'm going to do when I'm sober.
Don't do any when you're drunk. I take to see the ones you do when you're drunk.
I can do it when I'm drunk. My mouth seems to make all weird shapes and do accents. But yeah, those are probably those would be my best accents. But no, I said when I was talking to Gemma the other day, I said something about being Scottish. And she went, don't ever do that again. Okay.
Say that again.
Scottish?
You're Scottish. No, please don't do that again.
Yeah, she said, don't ever do that again. So, okay, madam. No, I won't. Yeah. But yes, conjunctivitis and Black and Decker. There you go.
Just stick to the Geordie accent. No, I mean, that'll do fine. Mm. So, you love your history.
I do. I think everyone should.
They should because, you know, I mean, without history, we don't have anything, basically.
Yep. I think a lot of people who dislike history, it's because they had a bad experience at school. They had a boring history teacher. It's the only way I can, they weren't shown how stuff that's happened in history is more dramatic than any film or TV show that a scriptwriter can conjure up. When you start looking at, you go into something like the Wars of the Roses, and you see the machinations of the two sides and what they were doing to each other and the plotting and everything else, and then you think that this is real. This isn't imagined. It reads like it's imagined, but it's not. And I always say that if you can actually put aside any preconceptions. It's pretty darn cool.
I totally agree. I mean, I get kicked out of history in school. I was just thick. It's just, nobody, you do history in school, but boring, But I know you mean the preconception. I mean, we're starting work to plan our Wallace Trail. Now, everybody's seen Braveheart, and it's a fantastic film. I've watched it, I don't know how many times. And basically, it's true. The sort of general outline, it's true. But it's when you start looking into it, the behind the scenes, that's what we were doing, Forgotten Braveheart, as we're calling it. And it's when you start looking behind the scenes and digging it, that's when it becomes fascinating.
I mean, what you get, you see on the screen in a film or has some kind of historical accuracy, it's what they think is going to grab an audience. It's when, like you say, you start going into the rabbit warren and you go off in one direction, then you go off in another, and then you go off in another. And I mean, I always joke about this. My ideal day out is being dumped in the records office in Essex, where I live. And I'll always say to the husband, I'll be a couple of hours. I've just got to look this up. And 6 hours later, he'll be phoning me going, are you coming home today or not? And it's dark. You just get lost in all the different things that you start finding out and the information. And you'll find something out that isn't applicable for what you're looking up, but will become applicable for something else you end up looking. And it's just so, and then you find all the stuff, the crossovers, and how intimately woven together everything is. And I do think it's either that you weren't allowed to study it at school because you weren't in the right set at school or whatever, or you had I had a brilliant teacher when I was doing my O-levels, my GCSE O-levels. He was absolutely brilliant. He's the one who encouraged me to enjoy history, encouraged me to ask questions, encouraged me to dig into it as much as I wanted to. My A-level teachers, no, they were literally just book and just giving you the facts. There was no making it come alive, making you understand how it applied to what you're living through today. I noticed one of the comments, someone said that history shapes through time and how we live today. And that's so true. And that to me is how a good history teacher can teach children. It's to show them how it's real people. And that's, so I get very sort of, try to instill that understanding and passion in my own children. Not as easy as my mum, and obviously they don't want to listen to me, but other, friends' children who will listen to me and other people. And, it's the whole reason Haunted Histories came about was because I knew people who were like historians who thought everyone who was in the paranormal world was all a bit doolally, a bit woohoo.
As we do.
Yep. But then people in the paranormal thought anyone who was into history was boring, dull, had like leather patches on, tweed jackets, and sort of couldn't, didn't know anything. And it was to try and show both sides. Well, actually, if you two work together, we can achieve even more. And that's what I've aimed to do. That's why on my podcast I have just as many paranormal people now as I do actual historians. I've got good friends now who are classic historians who actually see that what we're doing isn't, some of the shock horror television programs you see. There is actually purpose to it. And they actually quite enjoy now hearing about things that we've discovered and little snippets of history that actually just verifies the evidence that someone's achieved. And so that's what my goal was for Haunted Histories in the first place.
I totally agree 100%, honey. With the, you see, you've had paranormal. I don't know what paranormal means. Paranormal people. There's a new word. I think I invented a new word last night as well. Husby. Husby. I invented a new word last night. We done a show last night, and I meant to say husband and hubby. I had the two words. Okay. Husby, and just.
You see, that's why we're struggling to understand you. We're thinking it's the accent. It's because you're making up words that we don't never heard.
Well, true, So paranormal means paranormal people. I never write anything down, but you know what? I'm writing that one down because I'm keeping that one. I don't know how to spell it because I just invented it, but I suppose I can spell it whatever way I want since I invented it.
It's your word, yeah.
I've helped my pen actually worked with it. No, I get you. I mean, because we do the same. We get paranormal teams on and etc. But we also have historians like Mark Edgiston, Simon Entwistle, Mike Koval as well. Because you do need to mix them in. You can't have one without the other, and vice versa. And history is so important. And as I say, when I was at school, I get kicked out of history. Wasn't interested, I'd rather listen to my music. As people do, But it's when you start, Lorna made a comment there. I like learning about how the ordinary folk lived.
I'm gonna. That's that's a very good point. But one of the things I was going to say is that I have been attacked for trying to explain stuff that happened in the past by people. I got called a white supremacist Nazi by someone because seriously, because one of my specialisms is the workhouse, the Victorian workhouse. That is one of my specialisms. And I was trying to explain that the workhouse wasn't designed to kill off poor people. It was a way of trying to economize on all the poor relief that they were paying out. And also that they didn't want people to claim it just because. They wanted them to claim it because it really was the last resort. And I was trying to explain this, and too many people take what happened, say, 200 years ago, or even 100 years ago, and put today's morals against what happened. And one of the things I will say always with history is you might look back at something that happened 200-300 years ago and think, God, that's awful. We should never have done that.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, that was the norm. So children going down the mines at 7. Can't imagine doing that now in this country. But 250 years ago, that was acceptable. It wasn't criminal. Children weren't seen as children like they are now. They were just another pay packet, basically. So and because I was trying to explain about the workhouse, like, don't put modern sensibilities on history. You can't, because you can't change it. It was there. This was the reason. Despite, there were some workhouses that were run by really dodgy people who were doing it for the wrong reasons, like there are now in businesses.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole, when you start looking into, and that's what I got called, a white supremacist Nazi by someone who said that basically workhouses were no different to Nazi concentration camps. And if I was trying to explain the purpose of them, I was no different to a Nazi, and I just wanted to kill off poor people.
That's lovely. Laura's she's one of our researchers on our team.
Yeah.
I was going to mention the chimney sweeps. You know, the children used to do the chimney sweeping. And, you know, in this day and age, if you wanted to stick a kid up a chimney, you know, you'd be locked up.
Well, when you look at the cotton mills, like very sort of obviously very, very popular in like Lancashire and that side of the Pennines, they would have small children crawling under the I don't know what they'd call them, the looms, because their feet were small enough to grab the bits of cotton and change the reels and things like that. It was horrendously dangerous. But they needed small hands and small children, so they employed small children to do that. Now, you know, looking at that now, and as a mother myself, it horrifies me. I mean, the workout, the one that always shocked my son, my older son, is that from the age of 7, children wouldn't be kept with their mothers anymore. They'd be moved into the children's wing. And he's like, really young. I said, yeah, but it wouldn't have been seen that young then. It's just how it was. You can't take how we feel about life now, because as somebody said, how we live now has been shaped through that. You know, the fact that children do get an education till the age of 18 if they want, if they want it. The fact that children aren't allowed to work 35 hours a week at 8 years old. The fact that, all of that is because people have stood up and said, this isn't really right, we shouldn't really do this. It doesn't mean it didn't happen. As Laura said, it was normal. It was normal. Also, the mortality rates in children, until relatively recently, really, the mortality rates until pretty much inoculations and NHS and all that kind of thing. When you look at why people had such huge families, there was no social services if the father couldn't work, so the children had to earn money. And also the likelihood of a child not making it to their 5th birthday was really high. So, it was almost like you couldn't get too attached to them in a weird way because they might not live. And when you start looking at that sort of social side of it, it makes you think very deeply about why they were treated the way they were. Whereas now, we wouldn't dream of doing that.
I've heard that before. I've read it. I heard it before. But they used to not become too attached to their children, which sounds bad. It was their daughter's sons, and that was the reason why.
Yeah.
Because, they didn't expect them to have them very long. Maybe 5, 6 years tops, and then
Right.
that was it. And this day and age, but as the comments are saying, it was normal back then. And we can sit and criticise, that's disgusting, that's terrible. Can you imagine it? And because we've been brought up in a modern society, basically. We don't have children up chimneys and underneath looms and all the rest of it anymore.
That's right. That's right.
So that's why it seems abnormal to us, because we've never done it.
Yeah.
We've never
one of the other workhouse things that they did, and again, people were shocked at this. I mean, the workhouses, the Victorian workhouse, is one of the first things to offer mandatory education to children under the age, I think it was 14. They had to have 3.5 hours a day, Monday to Friday, of education, which they wouldn't have got anywhere else for free. That's because they wanted to. They felt that there was what they called deserving poor and undeserving poor. So a deserving poor would be someone who was like elderly, which meant they were unable to work. Someone who was physically disabled or mentally disabled, they would be classed, and also the children of poor families, because it wasn't the child's fault. They'd been born into a family that couldn't afford to live. So they wanted to break that cycle. And another way they did it was giving these children apprenticeships. And the thing is, occasionally those went a bit wrong, especially in mining communities. And there was a story of a child who they weren't supposed to go down the mine under a certain age. I think he was 8 at this point. And it was discovered he was 4.5 because he'd lied about his age. And no birth certificate, so they couldn't prove how old he was. No ID back then. And it was only when the mine owners said, this child can't do anything, I don't want them, that they started looking into it and found out he was like 4.5 years old. And there's an awful lot of people, oh, that's disgusting. Well, no, he was learning his trade. He was learning a trade to become a miner, which would have caused him to not need to be in the workhouse when he was older and all of that kind of thing. But it's all like, so you have to look at things that almost, and one of the things that I say, someone people, I know people like Mike Bell and Simon Wessel, there's not that many of us out there really, and we do all know each other. I mean, I'm talking about historians who don't do anything with the paranormal, and we'll sit and talk about, you have to interpret things without emotion, and that can be very, very hard. It can be very, very hard to look at sort of historical context completely unemotionally and just comparing it to what was also around at the same time. My best one is being called a white supremacist Nazi. Someone there has just put, I never thought about no birth records. No, interestingly enough, I think it was like the 1870s before it became mandatory that you had to have a birth certificate. But actually the workhouses, they did record birth deaths. They were one of the first institutions to do it as a matter of course. So, that when people slate, they were actually quite useful, especially for genealogists and researchers and stuff, because they did actually make records of that information. Whereas before, it would cost you. So most people didn't bother. You might have a parish record, but that wasn't guaranteed. So it's, but there was no ID to prove how old someone was. If a parent said, no, they were born in such and such a year, it's not like they could go to the computer and check.
You took the word, but for being 4.5, Laura makes a good, having disabilities was seen as dysfunctional as well. Which is very true. But I mean, that kind of dates back to hundreds of years, having disabilities. Take for it,
it was misunderstood. It wasn't understood. And you've got to keep in mind as well that, if somebody had some kind of disability, it would have meant they couldn't work. So it meant they couldn't earn money. And it was, I wouldn't say society expected everyone to be perfect, but, everyone was seen to have to do their part. And if you couldn't do anything because of your disability, that you can't. But they also were a lot more encouraging of people with, people with disabilities did do work. If they could, they would. And I mean, found a record of, it was a young woman in one of the workhouses. I think she had Down syndrome, if I remember rightly from the account I was reading. And she still did work in the workhouse. That's disgusting. She was disabled. She shouldn't have had to. Why not? She could. And she actually enjoyed it. According to the report, she enjoyed having a purpose. So it's one of those things. I mean, there was help there for people. I mean, it was more the understanding, the fact that, for example, epilepsy was seen as a mental illness. They were put into asylums if they had epilepsy, or dementia, old age dementias. That was another one. But again, it's people have started to learn more. They've learned more about how you treat mental health. And now we treat it differently. And I always say, in 100 years, I reckon doctors are going to look back on how we treated things like depression and schizophrenia and all those things and go, what the hell were you doing?
We'll be in the wrong. But I mean, disabilities, I know, a lot of people think, because somebody's disabled, they shouldn't work, but it's total bollocks. Because if you're disabled, you're still a person. You can still have feelings, you still go and work. I've watched a thing on Facebook just last night, in fact. I mean, but Sarah, my partner, she's disabled, but she goes out and works Monday to Friday. But I watched a thing yesterday. It was one of these. I love the videos you get on Facebook. I love going through them and I saved some of them. And it was one about a guy called Andrew who's Down syndrome, and he worked as a tyre fitter. Now, he'd been working at this. It was his boss that was doing the video, and Andrew's been with us for 30 years, and he came in here with his carer just as a work experience. But after 2 or 3 days, we realised that he didn't need a carer.
Yep.
And they fitted right in. It says, and he's been here for 30 years. And the boss started crying when he was talking about how good a worker this. And they show you Andrew, and he's jumping about quite happy. He loves his work, And the boss and Andrew are sitting there slagging each other off and all the rest of it. As a laugh. And I thought that was amazing. 30 years this wee guy has been a tyre fitter.
Yeah.
And I know a few years back, Down syndrome, but they can't work. They need carers, put them in a home, blah. I used to hear all that crap before. But it just goes to show, disabled people are people as well.
Very much. Very much so.
Unfortunately, there are certain disabilities that they can't work, physically. It's physical, but it's not their fault, but the majority of these disabled people can, and they want to. So let them have a life. Let them do it. Everybody.
You saw it a lot historically here after World War One, because obviously World War One was the first mechanized war, for want of a better term. You saw a lot of men coming back with like parts of their faces missing, limbs missing, and everything else. And although there was a kind of war pension set up, there was an awful lot of them were looking for work, and we're told, no, you can't do this job because we need someone who can do manual work. And they're like, well, there must be work we can do. And they kind of started changing the attitude towards people who had, especially physical disabilities, to what they were capable of doing. And it's that there was it was years ago, I watched a program on it, and it was explaining it all and how it changed the attitude to what people were capable of. And that they didn't need to be shut away behind a door. And you did get guys coming back from the front who would have had post-traumatic shell shock, post-traumatic stress disorders and things like that, which is a different thing. But those that did have to have the facial reconstructions and had missing limbs and had to go around in what would have been sort of early 20th century wheelchairs, and it was just like trying to prove that they could still do something, even if it wasn't what they had done before.
I proved that they could still do what. I mean, Laura, they say Laura's part of the team. She does her research and writing. Laura's deaf. She's stone deaf, but she's part of this team. She does investigate, and she works as well. She goes out, she's got a job. She goes out to it, and she does it. And she goes on just fine. She does talk quite loud at times, but I will say that,
Where is she from? Is she Scottish as well?
Aye, she's about 5 minutes up the hill for us. She's we've known Laura for Sarah and I about 4, 5, 6 years or something like that. She just stays up the hill. Her and her husband Craig, they're part of their team.
But do you not think though, with things like this, especially it's also their families and their parents saying to them, "You can do this. You're perfectly capable." If you get that from sort of, if society is turning around and saying you can't do it because you're different, and yet your family are saying embrace the difference, you can. It's gonna help. But it is interesting to see how different people in life have got started to be treated. I mean, I am old enough to remember when Care in the Community kicked in the early 90s, and everyone was terrified that all these people were going to be walking the streets. And to be fair, there are some that really should still be in some kind of safer for them. But for a lot of people, it's meant they can gain a level of independence that institutionalized meant they couldn't. And those people who were institutionalized, I mean, somebody mentioned there about, I think it was Laura mentioned postnatal depression. The amount of women who were in care in mental asylums because they'd had a baby at 16, or they'd upset their husband or their father, and they'd had them signed over because it only took 2 signatures to get them in.
To get them away.
And then they actually end up becoming insane because it's a learned behaviour around them. So it's all. I mean, those kind of things. It's say as a woman, it's horrifying to think that just because I had bad PMT, I could have been institutionalized. But that's how it was, and we've learned from that, and it's not happening. I did not think the conversation was going to go this way. I'm sorry.
That's the thing about our shows, though. We've had guests on and we've spoken about cooking recipes, and we kind of go paranormal history, and then it kind of, and then it'll come back. But to me, that's what these lives are all about. Watch some of them, and they're no disrespect to them, but they're very formal, very serious, very and you just want to turn off and go and find a bus to lie under, because you lose the will to live. But so our shows do tend to sort of stray and then come back and forward, But Sarah's saying hi. Sarah's my partner. Sarah's disabled, and she goes out to work Monday to Friday as well. We've also got a 6-year-old daughter, that 2 years look after as well. And so disabled people, if you want to, and I know you mean, so, I've said to Sarah quite a few times, she's sort of doubted herself sometimes, and I've said, go and try it. Go and give it a go. It might work, it might not, but do you know what? You're not going to learn. You're not going to find out until you get up and you go and give it a shot. Could be a total idiot. You might know, but at least the main thing is that you've got up and tried it, Without support I've had from friends, I would be very little help from society. Just your deaf ears. Just your deaf ears, a hearing aid.
Yeah, just your deaf. Here's a hearing aid. Get on with it. Yeah.
Get on with it.
But then again, I mean, that is unfortunately it's a lack of understanding and a lack of what can we do, and it's like my youngest son was non-verbal until he was about 3.5, so I was learning Makaton so I could at least communicate a bit with him. I had to work it out myself how to learn it because there was nothing to sort of help me. Just like he's got behavioural issues. That's it. So it's quite sort of we've come a long way in some things. There's a lot further we can go.
Oh, I mean, if you look at it, we've come a lot further, and if you trace it back through, century by century, like mental health, disabilities, the further you get back, often, you like to take the Pendle witches, for instance.
Yeah.
Some of them, they were all innocent, just sort of say they were all innocent. Maybe because they were kind of different from the mainstream society, you were a witch. Yeah. So you get burned or you get hung. There was the thing again pointed did, land dispute, love dispute, jealousy if you fell out with a neighbour. But if you were, like John Law, it turned out he had a stroke. But everybody says, well, it was young Alice, she cussed him. But it was a simple, or I was saying a simple stroke. I had two of myself. No, stroke's no simple, but it was a stroke he had.
Yeah.
But
that still happens now. All right, witch hunts have a different thing they're hunting for, but you still, I mean, I remember back in the 80s when it was all demon worshipping and demonic cults, and people were getting arrested for having, because their child had said they'd had a memory of a demonic cult being done in their basement and all that kind of thing. And most of these have been proved to have been implanted memories that these children had conjured up. I mean, you know, I'm not saying paedophilia is a good thing. Please don't think that. But how many people get accused of that? And then they have to take it seriously. Like they're a witch, they take it seriously because there's a fever about it. There's all these things that people get accused of. If you think about after World War II, the amount of people that were said to have been Nazis and got investigated, and they weren't. They were just German. You know, and you see that, like, but the witch side of things, if they were a bit different, if they were a bit odd, if they argued with the upper echelon, if they argued, you know, it's very, very sad. There was a case in Essex, Crumbs. It was relatively recently. It's in the last 200 years. And it was this gentleman. He was in his 80s and he was non-verbal. And they knew he was French originally, but he didn't speak. And he would just like wink or nod his head or whatever. And people would go to him for love potions because apparently he was very good at these love potions. So he was seen as a kind of, I suppose, a cunning man or whatever. But he was trying to get this. He lived rough. This is in Essex, and he lived rough, and he went to a pub and asked if he, basically using his sign language, asked if he could stay there for the night, and the landlady was like, "No, I don't like you, you smell, go away." And she became ill, and she said it was him, and her and two others ganged up on him and tried to drown him in the river because they felt he was a witch and he'd put a spell on her. And this is in the 1800s. Excuse me. Now, he was taken to the local infirmary, which was the workhouse back then. The poor infirmary was at the workhouse. He unfortunately died from exposure because he survived the drowning because other villagers came and rescued him, but then ran off, and he died from exposure ultimately. She was found guilty of attempted murder, and she got 6 months hard labour because they thought there was a possibility he had employed witchcraft. Now, things like that, and you think that's sort of 250 years on from what we think of as the witch trials, but it was still going on in the 19th century. And it's stories like that I do get emotionally sort of upset by them, but history is, like I say, if you go into the history book, delve behind the scenes, you will find something better than anything Steven Spielberg could film.
Oh, definitely. You know, last year we covered Pendle with Simon Entwistle and some other guests, but then we decided to do, we looked at the Pendle story, the story everybody knows, and we thought there's a lot more to this. So what we did was Forgotten Pendle, which was the people. Let's face it, the trials affected not just the accused and those executed, but it affected hundreds of people, far and wide. So we tried to, but it was just when we started looking into it, there was so much to it.
Yeah.
That people don't actually realise. Same, we're planning a thing, the Tudors, we're massive.
Sorry, that's my son just come in. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I just saw the wee body at the back there.
Yeah, that's him. That's not a ghost, if anyone's wondering. That's my little boy. Sorry about that.
That's all right, but we're massive Tudor fans. Sarah and I, we love the whole Henry VIII there and what have you. And no, your cup of tea.
I hate Henry VIII.
I don't know. Was he a tyrant or was he a hero? But then again,
tyrant.
He did change. He started out as being a kind of you know, a good king, but then he had the jousting accident, the head injury. So I think there's still a lot of debate goes on. Was it the accident that changed him? The head injury, did that point, you know, because
I
whatever.
think it did. I think that didn't help, but I think he always had it in him. I think it wouldn't surprise me if that head injury caused some kinds of can't speak, caused some kind of frontal lobe damage that changed his way of dealing with things. But that would have meant it was in there in the first place. It just came through, and you see, I'm Elizabeth the First. I think she's amazing, but I think Henry VIII. Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, but then again, I've been for my most recent book that I launched at the beginning of this year, The Battle for Bosworth Hall. I looked into the Plantagenets and the Wars of the Roses, which I'd never done before. Now, if you want a fascinating era, the Plantagenets has got more than the Tudors ever had. It's astonishing. But I think Tudor England changed England inexorably. It changed it to something that it never would have been under Plantagenet rule. But I'm not a fan of Henry VIII. I'd love someone to write a book. You know, like you've got things like Fatherland by Thomas Harris that shows what the world would have been like had the Nazis won the war. I'd love to read a book that's what would England have been like if his brother Arthur hadn't died? What kind of king would Arthur have made?
Yeah. Aye, that would have been interesting, but I do know you mean when you always had that in him, and I do have a theory, you know, as there's hundreds of theories. My theory is, you know, also Arthur was the firstborn. Henry was never expected to be king, so Henry was he was sent away, you know, and kind of shunned by his father. All the attention was piled on to Arthur, you know, but then unfortunately Arthur died when he was 15. And so all of a sudden Henry was shoved into the limelight. You know, and his father, King Henry, started to give him all the attention. And I think maybe that's where it started, that Henry felt left out and they had a point to prove. And so after his father, you know, after Henry was crowned king, one of the first jobs he done was to get Shorty to his father's closest advisors. He had them executed within 2 weeks, his coronation.
Yeah, I mean, some of them he had executed. I agree with you. He was the spare. He wasn't the heir. He was the spare. And it's a bit, you know, if you go back to the next sort of stage on, when a lot of people hate Richard III, Richard III never expected to be king. He wasn't even the spare. He was the spare's spare because he was the third brother. I mean, you had his brother Edward, who was king. Then you had the brother George, who, all right, he was executed for treason by Edward, but he would have been the second. Richard was the baby. He didn't ever expect to be king. So I just think, you know, Henry VIII, he signed more. A lot of people, when they think of Elizabeth I, and I can't give you the figures on this because I can't remember them because I haven't looked at it for a while, but I know when I researched it, a lot of people think Elizabeth I was executing loads of people if they displeased her, you know.
Henry beat her. Henry
was worse. Her father, Henry, he was actually worse, I believe, than Bloody Mary. I think, and a lot of people don't realise that you know, I'm sure I was watching a program recently with Susanna Lipscomb, who's obviously a Tudor expert, and she was saying that Henry executed more people than his daughter Mary ever did, yet Mary has the reputation of being Bloody Mary, like execution trigger happy queen. And she actually executed, I think she even executed less than her little brother, Edward.
Susanna Lipscomb, she's
awesome. She's one of my heroes. I love her as a historian. She's on my wish list to interview, I must admit.
She's a hard one to get a hold of. I've been trying to get a hold of her.
I'm kind of employing some of the people I know who know her to sort of say to her, please ask her. So
some strength. I did read one time that Henry was responsible for over 28,000 executions during his reign. Now, whether that's fact, you know, we don't know. But it was his favourite way of getting rid of political rivals or love rivals or just anybody that fell out with, really. And let's face it, if the king pointed the finger at you and says you're guilty of treason,
you didn't argue. I mean, when you think about as well with Henry, one of the other things that you think about is the amount of money he spent, how frivolous he was with the nation's money. I mean, he had over 50 palaces, and he was broke because he kept spending all this money on palaces and would. I mean, you think of like Hampstead Court. That was actually one of his religious. I can't even think of the name of it now. But that was
Hampton Court was originally built by Cardinal Wolsey.
That's the one, Wolsey. And he decided that it was $2,000 for Wolsey and said he wanted it, and so he took it over. He got one in Chelmsford. I live in Chelmsford, and there's a place called Newhall School. And originally, the housing estate, is called Bewley Park. And most people don't realise where the Bewley comes from. It was a palace. It was one of Henry's palaces. He decided he liked it. He bought it. He spent millions on doing it up. Like, who needs that many palaces? You look at how big Whitehall was when he owned it. It was huge. It rivaled. I think it for a while it was bigger than Versailles, and then Versailles added on some extra rooms and was the biggest palace. And and I look at things like that, and I think he didn't really care too much about his people. He cared about his gimmicks, and that's one of my issues with him.
Oh, I mean, over 50 palaces. That's what we have in over 50 houses.
Not just houses, like
palaces.
Ridiculous.
I know what I mean is that's he had 50 palaces, but imagine we having 50 houses.
Yeah.
Why?
You didn't rent out. You didn't have them as a rental portfolio. They were yours. I mean, he had people he trusted living in them. Ironically, it was actually, I think originally Bewley Palace was owned by Anne Boleyn's father or something along those lines. He was living there. And George Boleyn, her brother, the one who he had executed because he said he was doing the jiggy with his sister, he lived there for a while. He ran for her.
I've not heard they called that in a long time. He was doing the jiggy.
Bumping uglies, all that stuff. Yeah, I mean, incest. All right, I'll be technically correct. Incest. That was one of the charges that Anne Boleyn was executed for, wasn't it? That she'd committed incest with her own brother, which was a load of hooey. It didn't happen.
Well, that was all contrived between the Privy Council, and I still say Wolsey had his hand in it as well. He definitely, because Henry started to listen to Anne more than he was listening to his own council. It was a bit of a funny situation because the Privy Council hated Wolsey because he was the son of a butcher, basically. He wasn't a royal or noble birth. And so they hated the Wolsey. Let's face it, Wolsey was the second most powerful man in the country, basically, at one point. And the Privy Council didn't like this, so they were trying to conspire, we need to get rid of this guy. But then Anne jumps into the soup. She jumps into the mix, and the king's all of a sudden listening to Anne rather than listening to Wolsey. And so the Privy Council are thinking, well, we need to get rid of Anne. Wolsey's thinking, I need to get rid of Anne. And the Privy Council's thinking, we need to get rid of the two of them. And Henry's stuck. It was all a big mess.
Oh, yeah. It was all whispering in ears, putting earworms in, making people think stuff. I mean, obviously, the other thing with Henry is it was like, you must have a son, you must have a son, you must have a son. Mm-hmm. There was never any thought that maybe it was his fault that his wives weren't having sons.
It was always the woman's fault.
It's always the woman's fault, exactly. And, the fact that Jane Seymour did have a son, albeit she died quite soon afterwards. But yeah, I'm not a fan of Henry VIII. I think he's part of our history, but I cannot find any endearing
thoughts about him.
No.
You wouldn't want him as a father, basically.
No, I can't. It's. Yeah.
The thing that fascinates me about the Tudor era is just because of the whole thing, Henry VIII, the 6 wives, all the controversy between divorcing, beheaded, and everything. the Privy Council, Wolseley, Moore, Elizabeth, and you get Mary, you Catherine of Aragon, the way she was treated, and then you obviously get Bloody Mary, Elizabeth the First, Edward, who died. I think he was 15. I think he was 15 when.
Something like that, yeah. I mean, the fact though that he nominated Lady Jane Grey to take over from him, and she's never known. I mean, this is another thing that I think it kind of shows a level of misogyny in history. She's never known as Queen Jane the First, but she was. But he's known as King Edward. Yet he was never. There's all these kind of things that you sort of think she should actually be known in the history books as Queen Jane the First.
Because she was queen for 9 days.
Yeah, it's actually longer than that, because officially she should have been queen from the date he died. That's when she should have taken it on, but they don't. That's actually something Susanna Lipscomb was saying in her program. Like, why is she known as the 9-day queen when it shouldn't be near like 13 or 14 days? And also, why is she never known as Queen Jane the First? She's only ever known as Lady Jane Grey. But then you can go even further forward. You can go from when Elizabeth died, and it should have been Arabella Stuart took the throne. Yeah, it was your Scottish boy James got it. And
Mary's son got it. It was all. It was such a mess, really. You never knew who was in charge, and you used to say the king's in charge, but was the king in charge, or was Wolseley in charge?
Oh, the men were. I think ultimately they knew Henry could be in charge if he wanted to be, because literally a nod of his head, and they were gone. But I think a lot of them were very, very sneaky, and they knew how to get him to think the way they wanted him to think. They knew, he, at the end of the day, I don't think he was a very clever man at all. But then again, I don't think his father, Henry VII, was particularly. Henry VII was very easily coerced by his mother, Margaret Beaufort. Beaumont. I can't remember his mother's surname. Now my mind's gone blank. But his mother, anyway, he was very easily coerced by her. But the only thing with Henry VII was he was besotted with his wife, Elizabeth of York, and he would never have had 6 wives. So, I think Henry VIII had a temper on him. He was a stereotypical redhead in that respect. But I do think his council knew how to.
I think you have to bring him round to their way of thinking, and it was 9 times right. Okay, that's fine. Just do it. Or execute him, or do this, or just go and get it done. I'm off to play one of my 50 palaces, basically. So that's what I love about history. It's just so fascinating. And I want to come back to what you say, what would have happened if Arthur hadn't died, And you can think that way for, like say William Wallace, Battle of Bannockburn. What would the country be like if the Scots hadn't won at Bannockburn in 1314? Would Scotland be independent, or would they be under English rule? No offence. I'm just saying, people do ask, what would have happened if William Wallace? A couple of people say to me, what would have happened if William Wallace could beat Bannockburn? So, well, nothing, because William Wallace was dead by the time Bannockburn.
Well, if you think about it as well, if you go back to Henry Tudor, Henry VII, Henry Tudor, he was part Welsh. So he was the one that brought the Welsh Red Dragon into England. So what would have happened if Richard III had won at Bosworth? Would even though Wales was kind of occupied by the English, it wasn't classed as part of Britain or England. What would have happened there? I mean, I do sometimes think that for a book, it would be an interesting novel, like things like Fatherland and stuff like that. What would have happened if Henry VIII hadn't taken the throne? If his brother had survived, what might Arthur have done that Henry didn't, and vice versa? And I mean, Arthur was originally with Catherine, wasn't he? I mean, let's face it.
You know,
That's why Catherine was a good few years older than Henry. She'd actually been betrothed to his brother. And the only reason she married him was when the brother died, before he could fulfill their wedding contract. Her parents were like, either you've got to pay the dowry back, or we want our daughter married to a future king of England. And so married Henry.
they kind of married to keep the peace.
Yeah. And, you think of that, you think, poor woman, but they were together a long time before they split up.
I think
it was a long time.
I see that I've got the figures 22, 27 years.
I was like well over 20 years, yeah.
I was in the 20-year mark. And then, obviously Anne Boleyn popped up.
And also he realised that Catherine was getting to the end of her childbearing years, and he still didn't have a son, and he needed a son, and that's when the focus kind of changed. But in with Anne Boleyn, he'd been having an affair with her sister before her.
Aye, and this is the other thing. I mean, obviously, we've got Catholics and Protestants, and what a lot of people don't realise, and I'm not preaching religion here by any means, what a lot of people don't realise that we have, basically, when you strip away everything, we have Catholics and Protestants simply because a man wanted a younger wife. If you think about it, that's the bottom line. Henry wanted Anne Boleyn to be his wife, but Anne was quite, strong-willed. Says the only way, you make me queen and you'll get me into your bed. So Henry had to get this divorce, and it wasn't happening.
Yeah, it was kind of Anne wasn't going to do what her sister had done. She had seen her sister be the bit on the side, and with no importance, no gravitas, no ability to, she had to almost stay in the background, and she wasn't prepared to be just someone's bit on the side. And she sort of was saying to him, if you want me, you can have me, but I don't just want to be your bit on the side, I want to be your wife.
Aye.
And I kind of give her credit for that in a way, because she was meant to be quite a bright and articulate woman. She was actually quite well educated for a woman of the 1500s.
And I think that was her downfall as well.
Yeah.
Because she was quite intelligent and she was outspoken. Whereas, no offence to the other wives, but Anne was quite, straightforward. And even when she said to Henry Norris, you look for dead men's shoes, I think that finally sealed her fate.
Yeah.
Because obviously back then, it was an effect, it was treason even to imagine the death of the king. Let alone speak it, even to think about it, that was it. And I think that that was the final nail in her coffin. And because she was so strong-willed and outspoken, it was a good thing, but it was also our downfall.
It was a downfall. But then again, as I said, it's been the downfall for women for hundreds of years, in the fact that women were placed into asylums as 60, 70 years ago for being outspoken. That was actually one of the reasons you could be put into an asylum in the 1900s, was being outspoken and female. And it's like, really? I'd have been in so much crap for that. I would have they would have been throw away the key, she's gone. But what somebody said about Henry VIII starting Protestantism, Church of England. He, in a nutshell, he didn't want to have to answer to Rome. He wanted to be the kind of boss, make the decisions himself. And I mean, I'm sort of paraphrasing it very, very much here. But yeah, the Church of England, the Reformation, part of the Reformation wasn't just because he wanted to get rid of Catholic monasteries. He wanted the money. He wanted their money because he was skint because of all these palaces and stuff and all the expensive jewels and gowns and armor and everything else he was just splashing out money on. And he also then started to realize he needed a navy. He needed to put money into the navy. Didn't have it. So, this is so yes, he did. He started the Church of England so that he could be in control of it, and then he could get a divorce.
Aye, that was one of the first things he done. As soon as he Catherine was just basically told, we're not married anymore. I'm going to give you a house somewhere else, and bang, straight away married Anne. and that was it, you know.
And then there was lots of people executed because they refused to accept him as the head of the church because they were Catholics. Sir Thomas More being one of them, whose cell I visited when I went to the Tower of London recently. My friend of mine who lived there.
Yeah, it's an amazing. I've been to a tour 3 times. I think I've visited the tour, but it's an amazing.
The actual cell, Thomas More's cell, because you have to get to it through the private house. That's why it's not part of a tour.
No, I've been there the tour.
The White Tower, the bloody tower. Yeah, I got to go into the cell that they believe Thomas More was held in, which is actually off what they call the constable's house. The person who runs the Tower of London, his house, it's a private dwelling. You can't go in it. I knew someone recently who lived there, and he took me in there. Now, Thomas More was incredibly Catholic, and he refused to accept Henry as the leader of the church, and so he was executed.
I mean, Thomas, he knew Henry for his early childhood.
Well, he served his father. And some of the stuff that's written about Richard III, it's Sir Thomas More who wrote it, that Richard killed his nephews and everything else. But that's a whole show in its own right.
That's a whole different thing. The thing I found fascinating about the tour was the graffiti, whatever you want to call it, on the walls. You know, obviously it's got the perspex over it. But when you stand and you're reading, you know, you're looking at it and you think this was done hundreds of years ago.
Yeah.
Maybe during Henry VIII's time.
Yeah.
You know, by people who were held in here. But I think that's just totally fascinating.
I mean, when you start to really think and put yourself, one of the things I was lucky enough to investigate Fort Horsted. And there's World War I graffiti there because they use that as almost like a staging post for people going over the water to France in World War I. And there's all this pencil graffiti, and they don't let people see it because it's so fragile. But I sort of sweet talk my way in, being a historian and everything else. And the thing I noticed, I'm only 5'2". A lot of it was my height, and it makes you realise how short these men would have been on average. But also comments they were making was so typical of a 19 or 20-year-old, you know, hoping they were going to meet a woman, rude limericks. There was someone who'd sketched Charlie Chaplin, and it was phenomenal. And things like this. So doing that kind of graffiti, it is very, you know, it kind of, it does take you back in time, I think.
Oh no, it definitely does. When you stand and you're looking at it and try to read it, and what have you, what is written on the walls. I think Lorna's meaning in the tower. Maybe.
I would have said, yeah.
I can't remember what it was written. I think it's names and it's various scribbles and stuff that are really, really hard to make out. But you do when you stand there and you watch it. You look at them as if you just take yourself way back to then.
Yeah.
You know, it's like stepping from one world to another world.
Yeah.
But I think it's people's names, and there's some dates up there as well, 1600s and what have you. Just, you know, it's a kind of Tudor version of, you know, Scott was here 2020.
Yeah. Well, bear in mind, a lot of people would have been illiterate anyway. They might not even been able to scribble their own name.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is. I always thank my lucky stars that I get to visit some of these places, especially behind the scenes, because it does, as someone puts that, it humanises history.
Aye, you know, as you said way back. You know, and Lorna said as well, these people were people. They had lives. They had, you know, they were like you and I. It's the idea you're there where they
Very
were.
much so.
Blows your mind. That is true. That when I went to Hampton Court Palace, I visited there two or three times as well. It's when you're standing in front. Now you know yourself, Penny. Hampton Court is massive,
huge. Yeah,
absolutely. You really need to go there to appreciate it. But it's when you're standing just at the archway, you know, before you get into the main kind of courtyard thing, and you think everybody that's Wolseley everybody that's passed through there, and you're standing there where Henry Rates maybe, stood or walked, Anne Boleyn, all of them. And I'm actually standing here.
Yeah.
It's hard to take in. Is that an appeal for you as well? It's a big appeal for me.
Yeah. But then again, I like not know. I like going somewhere that doesn't necessarily have a famous name associated with it. Just being able to. I mean, I say workhouse history, so 1800s, and military, World War One, World War Two history, are the sort of things and going to somewhere like Normandy, the D-Day landings.
Mm-hmm.
And getting to see one of the aeroplanes, like getting to see one of the parts of one of the gliders, one of the Horsa gliders that landed at Pegasus Bridge,
Mm-hmm.
and actually being able to touch it and just think that was a glider that brought all these men to, and it's yeah, I do. I do, and but I like looking into the stories of the people who are not so well known, like finding information out about them, because one of the things you're talking about paranormal. If someone sees something, say at Hampton Court, they'll always assume it's either Henry, Anne Boleyn, the young wife he had, number 5, the one who was executed. Pardon?
Catherine Howard.
That's the one. They always imagine it's one of them that's haunting it, and I'm like, but it may not be. The woman you see might actually have been one of his servants who he'd attacked, for example. And so I like looking into the other stories of people and who else. Right, I'm going to mention that when Lorna said there, can you imagine looking forward to an execution? That was their version of a horror show. That was their version of reality television.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how many people enjoy watching a television show, reality television, and seeing someone made to look like a real idiot? And I mean, you think like Jeremy Kyle. How many people watch that knowing that people had killed themselves as a result of going on that show, and yet they still watched it?
Mm-hmm.
That to me is the people who would have gone to an execution.
Well, I mean, public executions were a big thing.
Yeah.
For hundreds of years, it was a family day out.
Mm-hmm.
You would take their kids to it, and you would have like market stalls, etc. People selling, so whatever the food was, their equivalent of hot dog stands and stuff. And
stuff, yeah.
People would travel literally for miles and miles with their children, no matter how young they were, just to go and watch a hanging or a burning or a beheading.
I remember there was a murderer in Norwich, and I can't think of the life of me what his name was, but I wrote about him in one of my recent articles for Haunted magazine. One of the other things I do, I write for Haunted magazine, and they had to actually lay on extra trains to get the amount of people to see the execution who wanted to see it. They had to lay on extra trains, and that's how busy it was going to be. And that's 1800s, mid 1800s. So yeah, it was entertainment, and I can't imagine it. I can't imagine why people would enjoy that. But people like seeing people destroy themselves almost, and
it was like, the execution of Dick Turpin, he was, highwayman and bravado and all the rest of it, and hundreds of people came to see that, and he put on a bit of a show before they actually hung. Mm-hmm. Look at me, I'm Dick Turpin, I'm a hero and stuff, and people loved it, even though he was going to end up swinging at the end of a rope.
I see. Here's another one, nasty piece of business. That one. I'm the new book I'm writing. I actually have had to look into highwaymen for, and I've not done too much on Dick Turpin because I know Mike Cavell's writing a lot about him at the moment, but I've done a bit because it fits with the bigger picture of the book. He was a nasty piece of work. The one thing he didn't do, one thing he never did, was rape. Whereas one of the gangs he was in, the leader did rape women when they broke into people's houses. He never did. But he was quite happy to assault an elderly woman so she'd tell him where the money was.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, assault by burning her, like branding her and things like that. He was not the sort of folk hero that people make him out to be. He was a nasty piece of work.
And then the court was just sheer chance. How they caught with the letter. I think it was a school teacher. if I'm
Something
right.
like that. Recognised his writing. Yeah.
His
But he
handwriting.
was the original Essex boy, Dick Turpin, original Essex boy. His presence in Essex was very, very strong for most of his life until he went up to York towards the end. So, yeah, I kind of I don't shy away from saying what I think about people once I've done research into them, but
That's
I
the that's the best way. We get back to what you were saying about the hauntings. You know, like to take Hampton Court Palace. Catherine Howe was rumoured to haunt there in the gallery, because obviously that's where she broke away from her guards to try and reach Henry. And you know, Anne Boleyn and a lot. But as you say, it could just have been, you know, one of the servants.
a lady in waiting, or because let's face it, I don't think Henry would have only just been going with the woman he was therefore married to at the time. Let's say he was auditioning women constantly.
I think
Um,
he's a very busy man in that department.
oh yes, oh
You
yes.
know.
So I just it's like at the Tower of London, people automatically assume it's certain people who they see, and my argument is, well, it might not be. It might be someone else, because even say the Tower of London, it was a royal palace. It wasn't a prison. It was a royal palace. It just happened to be a fortress. Um, so it's always it's always interesting to hear people's stories, but I seem to rain on their parade by saying it might not have been Anne Boleyn you saw.
But it is true. That's you said this in many a show. That's the thing about the paranormal and that. There's that many, you know, different theories. I know Anne Boleyn's rumoured to haunt 7 or 8 different locations. You know,
Busy girl. She's a busy girl.
I so, and this is what's always puzzled me. You know, you get Tower of London, Hampton Court, Hever Palace, Salisbury Hall, and there's another 2 or 3 places she's said to
There's
haunt.
a couple in Norfolk as well she's meant to frequent. Yes.
And you think, why would she haunt all these different places? Is it possible that people are seeing the apparition of a woman, and just because, you know, like take Hever Castle, because Anne Boleyn's ties to that castle, or that's Anne Boleyn, because she was born here, you know?
I think it's the difference between like an interactive haunting and residual. I think it's very possible. I had this conversation with Kieran O'Keefe, Dr. Kieran O'Keefe, because I've interviewed him a few times, and we talked about this because one of the shows we did was.
We chat there, but I can't get a hold of him either.
Yeah, he's very hard to get hold of. Hampstead Court, Hampstead Palace. We did actually talk about Hampton Court, and I said to him, what do you think? And he agreed with me that it could be some of them are residual hauntings, obviously, which could be anywhere because it is just a replay in time. Mm-hmm. Whereas, are there really anywhere where she's interactively haunting, like intelligently haunting anywhere? Or is it because of her life was relatively short, relatively packed, shall we say? She's got these different areas. There's enough energy to create these residuals. I don't know. I mean, I do joke that she's probably one of the busiest ghosts out there. But
she's well travelled.
Yeah, but then you can also say we don't know how they travel through the dimension. So it could be because for her going from Hever to Blickling Hall in Norfolk could be just like that. We don't know, but why Anne Boleyn? Why is she the most common one? I'd rather meet Elizabeth I, although she is Windsor Castle. I'd rather meet her than Anne Boleyn. So I do sort of, yeah, it is, but that's when I sort of say to people, how do you know it's Anne Boleyn you've seen? How do you know? You don't. You've seen a woman dressed in a certain way, and that's the name you know, therefore that's the name you attribute to it. But it could be. We just don't know, do we? We just don't.
You know, but I think, you know, this might sound nuts, just my think, you know, see you've got the ghost of Anne Boleyn, spirit of Anne Boleyn, then you've got the spirit of, you know, Joe Bloggs, who used to work in the greengrocers.
Yeah.
For instance, you know, I think you're more likely to get responses for Joe Bloggs than you are Anne Boleyn. Mm-hmm. You know, just your everyday, it's got to sound stupid, your everyday ghost, you know, they're just normal people in life, just, you know, workers and stuff like that. What do you think? Yeah, you'd get more...
I agree, but it's not so exciting to go to the newspaper saying that you've seen Joe Bloggs who used to work in the local greengrocers.
Mm-hmm.
It's much more exciting to say, I've just had a conversation with Henry VIII. Oh, okay, right. His armor is cursed. Okay.
Well, look at, I don't know if you remember, it's a few years ago now, they were meant to have caught Henry VIII's ghost on camera at the Tower of London.
Yeah.
Swinging the doors open.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all over the national press and everything. Every magazine you picked up, this was the image you got, and it turned out it was a big hoax.
Yeah.
You know, but it was, you know, John McGrath's to Land's End. Every books magazine you picked up, Henry, and it was Henry VIII's ghost. They were stating it. This is Henry VIII. And you were looking at the picture thinking, it looks like Skeletor out of He-Man. Remember He-Man with Skeletor?
He-Man. Sword of Grayskull and all that.
Aye, that. But Henry VIII was quite the size of a man when he, you know, left us. But this is a paper thin kind of thing.
Well, he was very tall, wasn't he? He was like 6'1", 6'2". Which, ironically, he inherited from his grandfather, Edward IV, who was also well over 6 foot. Mm. So, it's one of those ones, obviously.
There's a lot of say about so was Anne. She was normal, not by society's standards, but by her standards. Because Anne was the daughter of George Boleyn, and he was kind of, I think, if the stories are true, he kind of pimped out his daughters. Tried to pimp.
Well, the fact is they changed their surname, didn't they? Their surname was different. They changed it to Boleyn to make it sound more exotic. And they wanted to progress in society. So in a way, yes, he did pimp out his daughters, but his son, her brother, he was very successful in the Tudor time. I mean, before he was executed, he was quite successful. He you know, wasn't he the commander of the Cinque Ports or something like that? He was very successful. So Boleyn Senior was actually, you know, he was succeeding, but it's just, you know, I don't think Anne was normal. I think she was ahead of her time. I think her education, her ability, you know, her confidence was not normal of a woman of her generation. She was ahead of her time. But yes, so it is fascinating. But say if anyone's interested in the Tudors, go back to the Plantagenets who were around before, and there's an awful lot of stuff. And see if you think that Richard III stole the throne from his nephew, or if he didn't expect to get it. Is all I will say.
I'm definitely going to look into that. So, what side do you prefer? Do you prefer the paranormal side, or do you prefer the history side? Which you kind of call it?
What day it is? I think if someone said to me, "You can never investigate again, but you can still do the history research for people who investigate," I'd be okay with that. I've found, especially with COVID and all that, my focus was more on the history research, but also researching paranormal myths and looking into, is there any historical validation for it?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I enjoy. I do enjoy. At the end of it, I don't like people.
You don't like people?
Put me in a library with loads of books.
You are a people person. Again, when you get something for the history and you can tie it in with an investigation that you've done. We had that last year at Caldwell. We came up with names and stuff, and we were able to tie it in to the actual history of the place.
Yeah. I do. When I started, it was probably more the paranormal side I enjoyed, but I'll be honest, I actually enjoy the research side, the history side, the learning, and it's almost like, oh no, not another era I need to immerse myself in. But it's like, oh no, almost, it's and that's where I still enjoy doing the investigations. Don't get me wrong, but my focus probably is more on the history side nowadays than purely investigations. Although one of my books, The Haunted Experiment, was looking at the history of different paranormal experiments. So everything's got a history to it. Everything has got something you can learn from.
You see, Sarah and I'm more I love history, don't get me wrong. But I lean more towards the paranormal. Whereas Sarah, she leans more towards the history side.
Yeah.
You know, so it's an even balance.
Yeah.
I do love my history, but I like investigating and, you know, as you say, experiments and what have you. I was going to ask you about your books as well, The Haunted Experiment. Is it just as the title says, basically?
Yeah, it came about because I'd written My Haunted History, which was basically a version of my podcast. So the history of a location and then what I'd experienced investigating it. That's basically what My Haunted History was. And I thought, what should I do for my second one? And people say, I'll do a follow-up to My Haunted History, do another one. And I'm just like, no, I don't want to do the same book twice. That's cheating in my view. And I was actually where was I? It was when I was I did a photo shoot for the Daily Mail on women in the paranormal. And I was sitting there listening to some of the other women who were there talking about all these different experiments. And I'm thinking, actually, where do these come from? You know, who came up with this? What was the thinking behind that? Because everything's got a thinking. Everything's got a plan that the brain follows to get to where it goes. Nothing just goes, I have to try this method and knowing what it is. There's a route that. And so I thought, well, let's look at 4 different experiments that most people have heard of. So I looked at Trigger, Singapore Theory. I looked at EVPs, Estes method, and the Philip experiment. And I dug into the history of each of those experiments, like where they came from, who kind of pioneered them. In fact, for the Estes one, I actually interviewed one of the guys who pioneered it for the book. And then I took those experiments and tried them out in 4 locations to see what happened, and then wrote about that. So you've got the history of the experiments, the history of the 4 locations I went to, and then what happens when I use those experiments and how I use them. So it's not meant to be a book of teaching you how to do experiments, because there's loads of brilliant books out there. That's not my forte. It was, where do they come from, and how did I use it, and what did I discover? So that was where I haunted, because I wanted to do something a bit different to what I'd done before. And then the next one was Paranormal Playtime, and that's the British School Museum in Hitchin. And I was actually there doing an investigation with Sam Bennett and her crew, and the curator there. So they told him I was a writer, and he said, "Would you write a book about here? Would you do like your history deep dive, your covering activity here and everything else?" And that's where that one came about. And then the one I released earlier this year, The Battle for Bosworth Hall, is actually about the Bosworth Hall in Market Bosworth, and then touching a bit on the Battle of Bosworth Field. So again, it's got a bit of everything. It's got a bit of history of the area. It's got a bit of specific history. It's got some of the paranormal stuff that's happened there, and a bit of everything. So it's just trying to keep it a bit different, a bit fresh. And that's really where it all came from.
No, I do get what you mean about trying to be a bit different. We try to be no special. We're never going to be. We're not interested in being the top team in the UK or any of that. Bollocks kind of stuff. We just do because we love, but we do try to be kind of different, because I think that the paranormal needs different. It needs kind of fresh ideas. People trying things that they've never done before. We done one like the other week there. Say Laura's deaf. She's got a listening device. She calls it a set of earphones with a kind of microphone thing attached to it. The best way I can. I know Laura's watching. The best way I can describe it, though, it looks like a Walkman. I kid her on and say, "How's your Walkman?" Which she kind of follows out with me, but we went to a church a few weeks ago, and Laura says she heard a woman saying hello or hiya, and there was nobody else there, so this kind of gave me an idea. So what we did was we went to Culwinning Abbey, and we put Laura in the corner. You know, not because she was bad, just because it was. And we done it as a live. So Laura was in one corner, we were in the other corner, and what we did was with a whiteboard, and we asked people in the chat, you know, to put in a comment what they wanted us to write or draw on the board, whether it be a number, a shape, whatever. So Laura couldn't see what I was writing or drawing, and also she couldn't hear the chat. She was just standing herself, and none of us that was there said what we were writing down. And you know, the first one was a circle, and I drew a circle, and all I said to the spirit was, "Can you tell me what I put in this book?" What was that? Was your cat? I saw a shadow going across there. It's one of our cats. I thought I was seeing things. Where are you? There she's there. There she's there. I just saw this going behind me. I think you've been hiding. So the first thing we drew was a circle, and we says to you know, to the spirit, can you tell me what you can see in my book? And Laura says, I'm getting the word circle, you know. And so that kind of totally validated it. You know, we're not saying it was a brilliant experiment, but there was no way we could manipulate it.
Yeah. It's fascinating to do. It is absolutely. And that's what creates things in the field. It's people asking doing things slightly differently and seeing what happens. Laura's question there, if you could have dinner with anyone in history. Right, and we are not talking gaffer. I don't understand that.
That's what she calls me. She calls me the gaffer.
Oh, okay.
Because I'm the Walkman, a listening device.
Okay, yeah. So who would I have dinner with? How many am I allowed, Laura? How many am I allowed at my dinner party? One would be Wing Commander Guy Gibson of the Dambuster Squadron. Apart from the fact that I've always had a huge crush on him, even though obviously he's very dead. I'd like to know what happened when he crashed. I'm allowed 3. Okay, so Guy Gibson, Wing Commander Guy Gibson. He crashed his, I think it was a Mosquito. He was flying, Mosquito bomber. And I'd like to know, was it his mistake that caused him to crash? Or was he shot out of the sky? I'd like to know that. And also because I've got a crush on him. And I like aeroplanes and I could talk blankets. Who else? Oh, Florence Dixie. Lady Florence Dixie. She was someone who lived at Bosworth Hall. And she was an amazing lady. And she was also a feminist in the early days. And she was amazing. So read up on her. Lady Florence Dixie. She was a writer as well. I say pioneering female. Not many people have heard of her. Who else? I could list more than 3, but my last one I'm going to list is probably a strange one that people wouldn't expect me to say. It's Marilyn Monroe, because I'd like to know what she was really like away from the cameras.
That's an interesting.
I'd like to know what person she was. I think she was actually quite deep. I think she had a lot to say, but she knew that people wouldn't want to hear it because of her image. And also, I'd like to know if she took her own life or not, or if she was murdered. But mainly, I'd like to see what kind of person she was away from the cameras. So there you go. There's your 3. I bet you didn't think I'd mention any of them.
No. There's James from Hectic Paranormal, all the way from Australia.
Oh, wow. Hi.
I think she's just getting up there, 9 hours ahead of us. Lots of she was murdered. I think my 3 would be, you know, it's a weird mixture as well. Elvis, who I'm a major Elvis fan. Okay. You know, William Wallace, obviously because of, you know, who he is, what he still represents, and Thomas Potts. Jim's just getting up from the pendulum. Because there's been a lot of controversy over his book, you know, because obviously that's the only known record of the actual trials in 1612. So I would like to sit down with Thomas Potts and, you know, basically ask him how accurate was your book. Because there is quite a wee bit, a lot of people agree with it. Some people say it's a load of rubbish, that never happened. It sounds with witches as well and what have you. That's another one as well. I'd love to sit down. So I need to take 4. I need to be greedy because.
Oh, I could think of a lot more. Trust me. And I'm just thinking my choice in Marilyn Monroe might not be the good one if I want Guy Gibson to be paying attention to me because she's rather beautiful. So she can be there, but with a paper bag over her head.
Right. Okay. I don't know how to answer that one,
It's my sense of humor. It's my sense of humor. No, there's quite a lot that I would, if I could, yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot that, but those 3 probably, if off the top of my head, those 3 would, they'd see me out for the night. Yeah.
That's your list. Mine would be Albert Einstein, Marilyn Monroe, and Michael Jackson.
Interesting.
But fair enough. I'd like to talk to Salisbury which of the Salisbury accused, to see whether they were actually guilty or not, because they're still. That's still kind of up in the air as well, because obviously they dug up the grave of the baby and the coffin was empty. So was that wee girl actually telling the truth back then? Or not? This is one of the sort of great mysteries. But I've just noticed that that's the 1 hour and a half we've had you on.
It is, yes.
And it's just kind of flowing. So I think we'll wind it up there just now, Pen. But I want to get you back in, because I think there's still loads to talk about.
Probably.
I've found it totally fascinating and I've really, really enjoyed it. So just before we wind it up, can you tell people where they can find you?
Hauntedhistories.co.uk is my website. Haunted Histories on a Facebook page. Also, I write for Haunted Magazine. I'm one of their feature writers in the Not So Horrible Histories articles. My books are all available on Amazon, Penny Griffiths Morgan. You will find them there. I've got a Twitter account. I think that's Haunted Histories or something like that. But they're all links to all of them are on my website, hauntedhistories.co.uk. I'll be appearing hopefully on another episode of Help My House is Haunted soon. And Facebook, Haunted Histories. You can find me on there.
So you're right for Haunted. So you know Karen then?
Pardon?
Karen Frey.
I know Karen. Yes, I was at the festival earlier this year. Yeah.
We've had her on a couple. She's back. We've got her back on. I think it's next week she's in, actually. We've got her back on. If you're free, you're welcome. I'll tell you the date. If you're free, you're welcome to jump on.
Next week, I'm going away for a few days with the family.
Oh, off on holiday, are you?
Not big holiday, just a little one. We're actually going up to Market Bosworth because it's the anniversary of the Battle of Bosworth Field next weekend.
Oh,
and
right.
Massive reenactment and all that kind of thing. So we're going for a long weekend and probably get in a few. I'm an English Heritage member, so try and use my English Heritage card as much as we can to get some free castles and stuff and get the kids to run around to tire them out.
Comes in handy, doesn't it? Because it's quite, it's quite expensive. Getting into all these places. I found out when I went to Hampton Court, it was like £28.
I say the historic palaces. Yeah, the royal palaces are pricey, but
the thing that got me about Hampton Court, I don't know if they still do it or not, it was £28 to get in, and I felt like saying to the guy, I don't want to buy a brick or anything, I just want to get in, but you to pay for the car park, they'd pay you £28 to get in, and then the maze, they were charging £11. And I actually says to the guy, I says, listen, I just paid £20 odd to come in. I says, you want me to pay £11 to look at some hedges? He says, I can go across the street and look at hedges for nothing. I says, so, keep your maze. I mean, really £50 or something for a day.
It does get. I tell you what, one of my favourite museums, if you're ever in London, it's in North London and it's the RAF Hendon Museum. And it's normally free to go in and there's hangars full of aeroplanes. It's brilliant. The only thing you have to pay for is the car park out front. And it's really, if you like aviation and the history of aviation and all of that kind of stuff, it's really worth going to because they've got some amazing real aircraft there. And that's a free museum in London.
We're hoping to head to London the next couple of months to meet up with Wayne Miles. The place I loved in London was it's in front of the house. It's called the art museum. The
Tate, not the National Art Gallery.
Aye, that. I forgot what it's called there. I spent hours in there just wandering about in a daze, you know.
I'm like that in the Imperial War Museum in London, especially because its history it was originally Bedlam, the lunatic asylum.
So I'm not here as it is, you know, but I just found some of the paintings in there. There's one in particular. This thing is massive. It's the size of a wall, and I think it's the Houses of Parliament. You know, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but I stood and I studied it for I don't know how the detail that is in this painting. You know, it's the size of the side of the house. This thing, and I don't know how long it took. Must have took years to paint it, but right down to the very last detail. You know, people's. You know, figures that size in it, right at the back, the speaker of the house, and all the rest of it, and
amazing,
it's just amazing, you know. But I'm not an art person, I must say. I do like, you know, I used to like drawing the colouring the numbers or whatever it is, you know. But we do need to get back in, Doc, because it's thoroughly enjoyed tonight, and the time just seems to have kind of rolled away, you know.
It has. It's always a sign of a good interview, isn't it? Chatting easily.
That's it. You know, it's weird. You know, we've had some people on, and it's been. I don't name any names, but it's been like drawn, taken up with quicker grown hair. But you know, they're still all lovely people. So I'll keep a hold of you for a wee second or two after we come off, Penny, if that's all right. So,
of course.
A major thanks to Perry tonight. I hope you enjoyed the chat, folks, and for everybody that came in and for your comments, etc. Laura, I'm sorry about the Lockman comment, but you know I just love winding you up, though. So that's us for tonight. We're back tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. Tonight we've got Mr. Matt Barron, the paranormal consultant, and James Warrior from Hammertown Paranormal. We're bringing. I just slipped up because James doesn't know Matt's coming in. That was
just now.
I just realised that. All right, James, you're watching this. Matt's coming in to see you tomorrow night. All right, surprise going. I just blew that one, didn't we? I arranged this weeks ago with Matt as well. I just blew that in the head, didn't I? However, so we're back tomorrow night at 8 o'clock, folks. So thanks again to Penny and thanks again to yourselves, and enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll see you very soon. So take care. Bye. Bye.